This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, there's a report that Senator Marco Rubio is facing pressure to run for re-election. More of Florida's Republican establishment gets on board the Trump train. A Tallahassee judge turns down a challenge to the way the state funds public education. And a Bay Area congressman exposes the fact that 4,200 veterans nationwide were wrongly declared dead by the VA. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Steve Bousquet is the Tallahassee bureau chief for the Tampa Bay Times. Noah Pransky is an investigative reporter for 10 News WTSP. Deborah Tamargo is the first vice president of the Florida Federation of Republican Women. And Barry Edwards is a political strategist, a radio commentator, and a Democrat. Well, it's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. Well, CNN is reporting that top Republicans are becoming nervous that they may lose Marco Rubio's Senate seat and their tenuous majority in the chamber. Now, many want the Florida senator to reconsider his decision to leave office. Behind the scenes, a number of senators, donors, and leading party officials have privately prodded Rubio to make a late entry into the race to prevent his seat from flipping. So far, Rubio is declining, but the pressure is mounting on him to change his mind before the June 24th filing deadline. This week, Texas Senator John Cornyn, the number 2 Senate Republican, became the highest-ranking elected GOP official to publicly call for Rubio to run for re-election. And at a closed-door lunch of Republican senators this week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell urged his colleagues to encourage Rubio to change his mind. The race is already well underway with 7 potential replacements for Rubio, 2 Democrats and 5 Republicans crisscrossing the state, giving speeches and running millions of dollars in television ads. So, and Steve, even Donald Trump is calling on Marco Rubio to get in the race. What are you hearing?
Right. Well, I'm hearing that I don't think Rubio is going to do it now, but this feels like a rarity here. This feels like a story that's in flux and it's moving here as we're discussing it. Anything could happen this political year. We've already seen this. What they're not talking about, the elephant in the room here, is that if Rubio were to run, it would help Trump in one of his most vulnerable areas, and that's with Hispanic voters in South Florida. But every Republican I talked to, and I've talked to some people this week who are very close to Rubio, Rubio has said repeatedly through a spokesman, he's not running, no way. He said this week, Marco Rubio is going to go on a speaking tour and make $2 or $3 million next year easily, and he's going to be on several corporate boards, and he's going to plan the 2020 race. But he's not going to run for re-election.
2020 race for
president.
For president.
He's going to run for president.
So he's going to come back for president, not run for governor or anything in between.
Nope, this is all about running for president. This guy has a major, massive nationwide base, but it certainly is interesting to see that Donald Trump, the same guy he ridiculed as Little Marco, now he's cheering Rubio on to run for a Senate seat.
Deborah, what are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing basically the same thing, but I also am hearing that he may consider it if his good friend were to drop out right at qualifying time.
You're talking about Carlos Lopez Quintero?
That's who I'm talking about, but I think that's dangerous strategy. It happened when Sandra Mortham was running as the lieutenant governor with Jeb Bush. She dropped out of her Secretary of State race. Then when she came off the ticket, she got back into the race. Katherine Harris was already in the race, and that was the end of her political career.
We haven't heard from Mortham since.
It's a dangerous strategy for Marco Rubio.
All right, Noah, what are you hearing?
I think there's a lot at play here. We talk so much about down ballot effect of this Donald Trump presidency, or the possible Trump presidency. But really, I think, as Steve mentioned, they're also looking at the up ballot potential. Right now, Trump needs Florida, right? His whole presidential campaign may come down to Florida. He needs a way to find Floridians, and especially Republicans, to get excited to go to the ballot. It's going to come down to turnout. So what better way than take someone like Marco Rubio, who still does resonate with a lot of Republicans in a way that none of the current candidates for Senate do. I think Trump calling on Marco to come out isn't just a play to keep the Senate. It's also a way to put Florida back in play for Trump. and try and capture some excitement that he doesn't right now have.
But Rubio did so poorly in the presidential primary race. I wonder what his numbers are these days if he were considered, to be a Senate candidate.
Memory in political worlds are short. Look at how Governor Rick Scott won re-election after the worst numbers ever. Look at how Donald Trump right now is getting a lot of Republican backers, both financially and through their support politically at the polls. People have very short memories. I think Rubio has plenty of time to rehab himself in the next 5 months before the election. And more importantly, again, there's nobody that is exciting Republicans right now. The poll numbers for all the candidates are so low that it would be very easy for someone with a big name to step in.
Barry, what are you hearing?
I think that he will not run, and here's why. Everything comes down to human psychology. He did not like being a U.S. Senator, and he was going to quit, and he ran for president. And he basically came in second or third, him and Ted Cruz. And he knows that in the history in the Republican Party, that if you come in second, the next time is your time. He thinks that Donald Trump, like most Republican elites, is going to lose, and he wants to be positioned to be the nominee in 4 years. And to go back to the Senate, the one criticism that stuck against him was that he wasn't doing his job and was missing votes. So why would he now run for re-election and then in 2 years start missing votes again? That's going to exacerbate it totally. He doesn't like being a senator, and he needs to be unfettered. He's met all the people he needs to meet for donors by being in office. He doesn't need to do that. He needs to go get some intellectual credibility, get on a think tank, get on like the Heritage Foundation board or something like that. That's what he needs to do, not run for office. I don't think he's going to do it. But as far as his poll numbers, he's the most popular statewide elected official in the state right now, even with all the baggage.
Now, he was slammed by Donald Trump during this campaign, the little Marco comments and all that.
That's been forgotten.
Yeah. And he's saying this weekend that he's going to do anything he can to help Trump at the convention.
Absolutely.
But if he helps Trump at the convention, then that kind of precludes him from running for president. If Trump wins the presidency, then he'd have to run against Trump in a few years.
If Trump wins the presidency,
right.
all
He's not
bets
gonna
are
run anyway.
If Trump wins the presidency, then the Democrats will capture the House in 2 years. So if the Democrats really want to get creative here, they ought to let Trump win, and then they could get back for what they've lost. But he's not going to do that. And this is all hypothetical, and he's not going to run because he wants to be president. His eye on the ball. I've never seen somebody as focused like a rapier as he is in politics. He wants to be president.
Steve, would you agree with that? That's really Marco Rubio's ultimate aim, is that he wants to be president.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think he learned a lot from this race. This what's happening in the country right now, we've never seen before. We've never seen the mood of the country in the shape that it's in. I think Republicans think that it's not going to last. One of two things is likely to happen. Donald Trump wins the presidential election, and he has, in effect, hijacked the Republican Party, or Hillary Clinton will win, and the Republican Party will be at a historically low point in the history of this country, and they'll have to rebuild it from the ground up. The other thing that's stoking the talk about Rubio that he might run is all of a sudden he's acting very senatorial. All of a sudden he's holding hearings on the Zika virus and all this stuff. The point about the missed votes is well taken. What happened to the talk about Marco being a running mate, a vice president? He's ruled that out. I think he's taken that off the table as well. So I think he would look transparently opportunistic to now say at the 11th hour, my colleagues say that they've got to have me back in Washington, so I'm going to run for another term.
All right, well, let's focus on Donald Trump for a little bit. One of the Republican Party's top fundraisers, former Ambassador Mel Sembler of St. Petersburg, has been named to a top post on the Donald Trump Victory Committee.
Sembler, who's a shopping mall developer, is the latest member of the Republican establishment to get behind Trump. It's a surprise for two reasons. Sembler once said he had a fear of Trump becoming his party's nominee, and Sembler is considered to be close to the Bush political dynasty, and Trump has strongly criticized President George W. Bush during the campaign, saying that Bush lied about there being weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
So, Deborah, is this a surprise to you that Mel Sembler would get on board, or is this the way things are going for Donald Trump?
It is not surprising to me. Mel Sembler is a team player, and he is needed to be a captain of the team at this point in time. His close affiliation with Jeb Bush and all the Bushes is quite natural. Jeb Bush was an outstanding governor in the state of Florida. So they had so many of the same principles. I think he shares many of those principles with Donald Trump. When you look at the economic policies of Donald Trump, when you look at the more social policies of Donald Trump. If you take away the bluster and you look at the issues that are important to Ambassador Sembler, the drug issues, the family issues, the economic freedom issues, the opportunities, creating opportunities. If you take the speeches that Donald Trump has made, and there's an excellent one from North Dakota that was on YouTube this week, and you just fast forward, get rid of the bluster, get rid of the, all of that, and he starts talking about the principles and the economy and women and, what a Donald Trump presidency would look like.
Donald Trump has been running as an outsider against the establishment. And so, he's been criticizing the Republican establishment for a year, and now he's coming back being embraced by the establishment. I mean, is Donald Trump an outsider or is he an insider?
Well, it's the principles that we share. Take away the blusters, and we're about the principles. So establishment, non-establishment. Establishment meaning really who? The elected officials or your fundraisers, take it away. We're about a philosophy and a principles.
Barry, what do you make of Mel Sembler getting on board after this very tense campaign for the last year?
I was lucky enough to see him at a dinner on Wednesday night, the day that he came out with the whole finance committee. I think the number one thing that drove these guys to support Trump is that all of them had been past national finance chairs. And so their obligation wasn't to Trump, but to each other. Because when they were national finance chairs, they had to ask people when the other people asked them to raise money. So it's kind of a give and take, swapping out money. I think that he's not philosophically happy with Donald Trump. His comments are to the contrary of that up until the week of saying that he would sign on as one of the Finance Committee. But Republicans are going to support Republicans. We see 87% of Republicans now are supporting Donald Trump. And as I've said on this table last year, 91% of Republicans are going to vote for the Republican nominee, and 91% of the Democrats are going to vote for the Democratic nominee. And the only reason that Trump is competitive right now is because Hillary Clinton still has a primary. As soon as Bernie Sanders is out of the race, she's going to surge and destroy Donald Trump. So this is all Pyrrhic victory.
But Barry, I met so many Donald Trump supporters this campaign, outside the Sun Dome and elsewhere in Tampa, Donald Trump events. And when I asked them about the establishment, the Republican establishment, people like Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, they all put their thumbs down. They said, we don't want the Republican establishment. And Trump was bringing those people into the party and getting them to vote. That's true. So how do you make the turnaround? How do you make the pivot? How do you start to embrace members of the establishment?
Nominee, and we are so polarized in this country, unfortunately. The Republicans are going to. The Hillary Clinton thing with her email scandals, if that was a pretty scathing report. The Times did a great article on that, saying that she didn't cooperate. But if you talk to a Democrat, they say, well, she said she was going to meet with anybody anywhere. Well, she didn't. Democrats don't care about the facts. They care about somebody supporting their issues. Republicans don't care, unfortunately. We are so polarized to go to our corner, and that's just the way it is. So,
is that the way you see it?
Yeah, I think Republican, especially the establishment, looks at it and says, we may not like Donald Trump, but he's the lesser of two evils right now. We're going to have to choose between one of two people for president, barring some sort of miraculous recovery from elsewhere. And they say, he's the lesser of two evils. I think it was a group of wise scholars who once said, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with.
Steve, you follow some of the old Bush hands up there in Tallahassee. Are the old Bushers, with the exception of Mel Sembler, Sembler's on board, but what about the folks in Tallahassee that once were part of Jeb Bush's administration or supportive of Jeb's administration? Are they on board?
No, they're holding back.
Why?
But they don't like Donald Trump. They don't trust Donald Trump. They don't think he's a real conservative. There's a lot of reasons. The leaders of the Never Trump movement in Florida are Tallahassee insiders, a guy named Max Stepanovich, who was more tied with former Governor Bob Martinez, but he advised Jeb Bush. Rick Wilson, who's a prominent Republican. These guys are completely, persona non grata with Trump, and they use Twitter and social media to vilify Trump at every single turn. But the thing about Mel Sembler, Mel Sembler is in a circle of Republicans around the country. He knows Sheldon Adelson. He knows Barry Eisenberg at the Republican National Committee. These guys all talk to each other. You saw this guy, Woody Johnson, who's the owner of the New York Jets, who was all in with Jeb Bush, who's now a Donald Trump supporter. There's a slow coalescing coming around because a lot of these guys who want to be players don't have any place else to go.
And Deborah, what do you think about the Never Trump movement? Is it going to last very much longer?
It will last as long as the campaign consultants are being paid. They were out of a job when Marco Rubio lost Florida. Rick Wilson was out of a job. The hashtag Never Trump, that was a pack. Okay, we've got more money, and as long as the money lasts, they'll be the Never Trump people. But the money's starting to dry up, so I think they're, other than Twitter, they will probably go away.
Very last word.
I think what's important is even if the Republicans lose the presidency, which I think they will, the Republicans are not in bad shape. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the majority of governorships, majority of legislators. There's actually more Republicans in office in 118 years in the country. So I think what they're trying to do is they know they're going to lose the presidency. They want to protect everything else that they've got. And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people come out for Trump.
Barry, I can't let that go unanswered. I think the Democrats, I think a lot of the constituencies that you consider automatic, they're just going to go blindfolded to the polls, won't be there for you this time. Opportunity under Barack Obama, and it would be the same under Hillary Clinton. 1.5 economic growth, that's the worst of any presidency ever. And who's suffering? Those same constituent groups that were blindfolded. We see many minorities coming over to the Republican Party. I get calls every day from minority leaders. We ran, and from women who support Trump because of the economic opportunity, because of the security of our borders.
Deborah, I got to ask you, one of the things about, if you had Jeb Bush or somebody else running for president this time, you would have a network of people, not just in Florida, but around the country, ready to go. Trump doesn't have that network, does he?
Well, he seems to have a huge network right here in Tampa, Florida, and the minorities particularly are embracing him.
How come we haven't seen that in any single poll or at his rallies? I don't see blacks at his rallies, I don't see Hispanics at his rallies, and I don't see this in any polls. He's going to get 95% of the black vote. He's going to go for Hillary Clinton. The question is, does it turn out as much as for Obama?
I get invited by black leaders to events, and I was in the beginning very surprised that they were embracing Donald Trump, and this is even before the Florida primary.
And one last word. We haven't seen this in the exit polls. If the exit polls of the black independents and the other minority voters in the independents, how come they didn't say that they voted for Trump? If they caucused with another party in the open states, they caucused with the Democrats.
All right, we're going to have to move on. Well, this week a judge in Tallahassee threw out a lawsuit that contends that the state is shortchanging its public school students. The circuit judge ruled that education groups and parents who are suing the state had not provided enough evidence to show that the state's schools are not being given enough money. The ruling found that state lawmakers had met their constitutional obligation to provide a free, high-quality public education for Florida students. The Florida Constitution says education of children is a paramount duty of the state. The judge said that while the state's schools are not perfect, there was not proof the current system of education is in a crisis that requires the courts to intervene. He also raised questions as to whether a judge could even order the legislature to put more money aside for schools. A group called Fund Education Now and the Florida Education Association, the state's teachers union, were among those bringing the lawsuit. They indicated that they would appeal. A spokesperson said that the judge ignored evidence that showed that Florida schools are failing its students. Barry, a lot of people in Tallahassee who supported these education reforms that go back to Jeb Bush say, look, this is proof that we're on the right track. What do you say?
Well, I don't know if we're on the right track. I think that there shows the proof that they'll be able to win a lot of lawsuits in a row. But money is not the primary factor. We're about Florida's about middle of the pack nationwide for funding, and we're about middle of the pack as far as our performance. Noah and I talked in the green room about the 5 failure factories that got a Pulitzer for the Times. They spend $5,000 more per pupil than the best elementary school Palm Harbor does in Palm Harbor and Pinellas County. So money is not the only factor. I think what this shows is that we're not getting the bureaucrats in Tallahassee, the legislators, and the Republicans always talk about local control. How come they're not allowing local control in the local school districts to make decisions and to utilize their resources? So I don't think that it's showing progress for what they say, the winners, but I also think that on the losing side, money's not the option. We need to engage the community. We need to engage the stakeholders, and we're not doing that appropriately. Deborah,
does this show that we're on the right track, that the education reforms that go back to Jeb Bush are working?
They certainly are working, and all the national testing reinforces the fact that they are working. Graduation rates are up, math and English are up, so they are definitely working. Again, it's not the money, and if you look at the children that are succeeding now from charter schools and homeschools and virtual schools, again, we can see it's not about the money.
Steve, you think the judge made the right decision?
Well,
I mean, are we seeing improvements in Florida schools?
I think it's in the eye of the beholder. The funding has gone up, but we've written about this ad nauseum. The funding is going up so incrementally that and the student there's an ebb and flow of population growth in the state. The student population is on the way up big time again. 30,000 more kids. Two interesting points. One is George Reynolds, who made the decision in this case, is the same George Reynolds who ruled that the Senate's redistricting plan was unconstitutional, and he accepted in effect, a Democratic map, which could have important effects on the elections in this state. And had Reynolds ruled the other way in this case, after all these years, this would have been a humongous political card for the Democrats to play in this election year. To have a judge sitting in Tallahassee saying that Republicans have failed our kids, but that's not the way he ruled.
And Noel, what's your take on whether or not these education reforms have worked? Was the judge doing the right thing?
Steve and the Capitol Bureau do such a great job looking at the statewide numbers, and they look at those incremental small growths and the average student per capita spending. But what we've done at 10 News over the last couple of years, we've looked at some of the county by county. And the state's formula is 20 different random factors, which get changed every year depending who's in the leadership in the House and the Senate. And what it does is it creates winners and losers. And some of these small rural counties get half the amount of money per student that the richer counties do, which have more property taxes coming in already. So one of the big problems, and this lawsuit came out of Hernando County, obviously a rural county of Tampa Bay's north. One of the things that it really looked at, too, was the formula and how the state is giving the money out to the poor, smaller counties. And that's what's broken. That's something that needs fixing. And unfortunately, the legislators want to take care of their home districts. So it's just up to who is in power each year.
So wherever you have the most legislators, those districts, those school districts are going to be better off. Is that what you're saying?
Pasco and Hernando had a good year last year, and it has maybe something to do with who's in the leadership recently.
Well, Pinellas County Congressman David Jolly says that the Veterans Administration cut off the benefits of more than 4,200 people nationwide after they were wrongly declared dead.
In a letter to Jolly, the VA admitted the mistake involving thousands of veterans who received notice between 2011 and 2015. The largest number of errors occurred last year when the VA prematurely declared more than 1,000 veterans dead and then terminated their benefits before having to reinstate them. Jolly formally requested a report on the problem from the VA after hearing from a number of Tampa Bay veterans whose benefits were wrongly stopped. The declaration that the vets had died resulted in the cessation of benefits and a hardship for many veterans and their families.
So, Noah, with all the problems at the VA, this seems like a huge screw-up.
Just another one, right? I mean, it's been headline after headline after headline. Credit to David Jolly for getting ahead of this and getting his name attached to it and getting out in front of it. And he's done a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, nobody's ever going to confuse him with what Marco Rubio is supposedly doing and taking breaks. He's been very active in his time in office, so you give him a lot of credit for doing that while he's running campaigns and doing these other things. And I give a lot of credit to his press office, too, who is making sure that they're getting his name out there statewide on a lot of different issues, from Zika to the VA to the STOP Act. And a time when he's going to run for another statewide office, they're doing a good job to get him some free pub.
Deborah, do you think this helps David Jolly? I mean, I don't know if he's doing this for political reasons, but does it help his campaign for U.S. Senate?
Well, obviously it does. Anytime you get your name in print, it helps you. As Noah said, long list, so much needs to be done at the VA, and the first thing we need to do is fire the VA director.
All right. Well, before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? And Noah, let's start with you, your other big story.
Last night, 10 Investigates, we reported how Tampa's red light camera contract, the biggest contract in all of our part of Florida, expired, and nobody really did much about it. The cameras, according to the contract, should be turned off when the contract expired 2 months ago, but the mayor is working very slowly and deliberately on finding a new extension. City Council had nothing to do with it. It's on our website, WTSP.com.
Are they still issuing tickets?
They're still issuing tickets. They say they're eventually going to get around to a new deal.
Are
City
they
Council's
legal?
not happy about it.
Are those tickets legal?
The tickets are legal as long as they keep them going, but City Council is soon going to butt in.
Barry, your other big story?
Really exciting news out of Madeira Beach. One of my clients and one of my friends just got approval at the last City Council meeting in Madeira to redevelop 15 acres where the old Lever Rocks was, which has been run down, dilapidated, drug addicts there. They're going to turn it into a destination like a Longboat Key. So you won't have to go from Tampa anymore to Longboat Key. You can come over to Pinellas County.
Are you talking about a high-rise on Madeira Beach?
Well, not high-rises, 12-story condos, hotels, and some big 15,000 square foot restaurants.
All right, Deborah, your other big
I
story.
think it was 7 stories.
Your
The
other
big story on the street, there has been a poll run in the clerk of courts race, and it appears that Eric Seidel is leading neck and neck with Pat Frank, and Kevin Beckner is down by double digits. Also good news in the property appraisers race in that I'm not sure it's a poll, but there's been some movement in the direction of Todd Jones.
All right, so that's all in Hillsborough County. And Steve, your other big story.
I've got a Pinellas-related story for you, just to keep things moving along. I spent a very interesting day this week in Clearwater, on Clearwater Beach, at the annual conference of the Supervisors of Election. I spend a lot of time looking at the mechanics of election, because anybody who's lived in Florida more than a year knows that, there's always the potential for difficulty. But what I saw was interesting was this. Pinellas County has been the runaway leader in this state, Deborah Clark, in encouraging people to vote by mail, to vote absentee. And I saw county after county at this conference with all kinds of gimmicks and attractions and ways to encourage voters to vote by mail all over the state. What that means is a couple of quick things. One is more people are voting by mail, they're voting earlier. So this time-honored notion of a candidate saving my money till the end to attack my opponent is an outmoded notion. The other thing to keep in mind is that people who vote absentee, especially elderly voters, are more apt to make a mistake and have their ballot invalidated. There are ways to prevent that from happening, but voting by mail is going to become more and more of the way to vote in the state.
And Steve, in your story, you said 80% turnout potentially in November?
That's what they're saying based on the turnout in the primary, but I'm skeptical about that because of all we've discussed here today. The more negative the campaign is, the more people get turned off and don't want to vote.
All right, well, thank you all for a great show, and thank you for watching Florida This Week. We want to hear from you. You can write us at ftw@wedu.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And you can watch the show online on the wedu.org website beginning Tuesday morning. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a happy Memorial Day and a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.